So if you make a claim that throughout the Iliad, Achilles demonstrates a hot temper, you have to follow that up by showing us at least one example of Achilles losing his cool in the Iliad. You have to actually cite a scene with either a paraphrase or quotes, but in this case I think quotes would, like, you want the exact wording. And then you have to explain how whatever you just quoted demonstrates Achilles having a hot temper. That's true, like, anytime you make that type of claim, like the kind of claim that says throughout whatever text, such and such is a trope, such and such is a theme, such and such, this particular character demonstrates XYZ trait. Anytime you make a claim like that, I don't know why I'm clapping. Anytime you do that, you have to give us at least one example of that thing actually happening in that text. If you say that Maeve is bloodthirsty, you have to give us an example of Maeve being bloodthirsty. I would go with the passage where she's like, well, we can't take them with us and we can't leave them behind. We're going to kill them all, right? That's a good example of that trope. A lot of people did this thing where they made the claim that such and such happens throughout the text, or this particular character is such and such a way. And I don't actually disagree with those claims, right? Like, I'm like, yeah, they are, I agree. But you have to show it on the page, right? Like, you have to give us at least one example that shows that. Whatever thing you just said, you have to show it on the page. You have to give us a key quote or exert a useful scene, and then tell us how the thing that you just put on the page, like that you borrowed from the Iliad or whatever, you have to tell us how the quote that you gave us shows what you said it did. Okay? That is also true with other kinds of evidence. It's just with this type of essay, most of your evidence is going to be from, the texts that we've been reading and discussing, right? But in the same kind of way, if you make a claim that, I don't know, the ancient Greeks drank a lot of wine, which they totally did, but if you make that claim, you have to show us some kind of evidence that indeed this happened. And since you presumably have not time traveled to ancient Greece, you could have met the doctor, I don't know. But presumably you haven't time traveled to ancient Greece, so you have to show us, like, why would we believe that? Like, where's somebody who does have the expertise to make that claim? Show us where they said it. That could be from an academic article, or it could be from, a history text or something. I feel like a lot of these claims that are made, like, several people included background information kind of stuff about ancient Greece or Mesopotamia, or about different types of philosophy, or, all really interesting. But you need to tell us where, like, we do not trust you to be the authority on, like, the history of philosophy, or on psychological concepts, or, the history of the ancient world. Or, we can't take your word for it. So show us, someone who is a recognized authority on the topic giving that same information, right? Which I suspect in some cases is kind of how you came by that information anyway, and, like, you are now pulling it together and pulling together pieces of background information that you've picked up in college, presumably in your other courses, and integrating them, and that is great. Okay, that is exactly what we want you to do. Let's go team. But sometimes when it comes to material that is kind of background-y, people aren't, that's not a word, but stuff that's like, okay, this is how we understand ancient Greece. These are the main things that we know about, like, these are some basic concepts from philosophy, or these are some terms from psychology, and they apply, and they very plausibly might. A lot of folks were not sure in this set of essays how and when to indicate where they were getting this kind of information. Because it's not, in most cases, really common knowledge. I mean, I know that there is kind of a rule of thumb that if you find this information in at least 4 sources, it's common knowledge. Once you get into highly specialized areas of research, no, it is not. Like, you cannot sell me on the idea that the construction process for Mesopotamian ziggurats is common knowledge. It just isn't. maybe if you are interviewing a specialist in Mesopotamian history, maybe. The same kind of deal with like, it probably is common knowledge that that literacy in the Middle Ages was pretty limited. Okay, like you wouldn't have to source that, but a claim that you made about like the context in which medieval manuscripts were created, because I've given you lots of background information on that kind of thing. Like that sort of stuff, you would have to cite if you were going to use it in a paper in another class, which you could. There are methods in MLA style for indicating when you're citing from like Canvas posts, discussion threads, when you're citing from lecture notes, right? Like a lot of times I'll open a class period and I'll take some questions and then I'll go over lecture notes and I'll explain some stuff. There are ways to indicate that kind of source in MLA style, and it's not any more complicated than citing a book. It's the same kind of process. But there was like really consistently across the class as a whole, like I didn't see people lifting phrases and dropping them into their essays. Like I didn't see that kind of like, this is a gross like we didn't have to have like this is not acceptable conversation, but there was just like a lot of uncertainty about what kind of information called for source and how to indicate that was happening within the body of your essay. So the rule of thumb, or the like way that I would explain it, is if it's something that you learned in college, you should cite it. Because most of the time, if it's something that's taught in a college course, it's something that probably isn't common knowledge to the general public. That could break down, like you poke at that rule enough and you'll find exceptions, okay? But broadly speaking, if you first heard it in a course and you remember like, oh, I learned this in psychology class, cite the psychology class. Usually it's the instructor's name and like the semester, like fall 2020 or whatever. I felt like I wanted to say more about that, but no, I don't. If you have evidence, like if you make a claim, you have to support it with evidence. If that evidence comes from anywhere other than your own head, you need to tell us where that source was. It's not super complicated, but sometimes people need a little bit of practice working that out on the page and figuring out like, okay, nuts and bolts, where do I put the phrase and that kind of stuff. These are the basic rules. If you have questions about how to implement them in your specific essay, let me know and I will be very happy to walk through the essay with you. I do this with my 112 students all the time. So, yeah.